Hello, and welcome to an all-new episode of the Transfix Take podcast, where we are performance-driven. It's the week of December 13th, and we are bringing you news, insights, and trends for shippers and carriers from our market expert, none other than Justin Mays. Mays, how's it going?
Hey, Jenny, it's great to be back with you again this week as we talk more about the freight markets and analyze what happened last week and what to expect as we go into the final days of 2024.
Well, I cannot believe the final episode of the year is finally here. But Mays, before we say goodbye to 2023, we have a lot to get into. But first, I know you've got a fun fact, so lay it on me.
Well, Jenny, the fun fact of the week is that around 35 million Christmas trees are harvested in the U.S. each year, and 95% of that is transported by trucks around the U.S.
And fun fact, if you have been following Transfix for some time, when we did our Transfix My Rig, our first winner, Debbie Desiderato, actually transported one of the Rockefeller Center Christmas trees, the iconic Christmas tree. So I thought I'd throw that in. And shout out to you, Debbie. We miss you and hope you're doing well. That said, tell me where we stand when it comes to the average national rate per mile. My understanding and guess is that you were right, and it has gone down just a bit.
That's right, Jenny. Last week played out very similar to the way that we anticipated. The national average rate decreased. It wasn't a huge decrease, but it was a slim decrease from last Monday to this Monday. Now, going into the next 2 weeks, and even in the very beginning of January, we do anticipate some volatility to come into the market. Now, this is likely going to take place on the heels of Christmas and remain volatile through the beginning of the new year.
All right, well, that all makes sense. But now last week we made a couple of big bets, Mays, and I'm curious to know where you landed when it came to those big bets. Do you remember what they were?
Well, Jenny, I think my bets were pretty accurate. Yes, at a national level, we saw rates decrease. Although it wasn't a large decrease, we did see rates decrease. We're seeing a very similar trend as we did last year. When it comes to where we saw rates decrease, it's exactly where we called out. It's in the southern regions like the South, the Southeast, and coastal regions. I will say, to my surprise, Jenny, the Midwest actually saw a very slim decline, which was not what I would have thought would happen coming into this week.
Which is true. We were looking at the West Coast and the Northeast, which leads me to my question of where do we land there?
It played out exactly how we thought it would. Some slim increases, even though the general national market has declined.
All right, and if you were to give a prediction on where we'll land at the end of this week going into next, what do you think that'll be?
Well, Jenny, for this week, we're going to continue to see that same trend. There's still going to be a lot of capacity out in the roads, and most likely we're going to see that national average rate continue to decline in a very slow manner, but specifically in the more southern regions. Now, the Northeast and the West Coast will likely continue to be a little bit tighter out there for the shippers, allowing carriers to put some pressure on rates as we go into the holidays.
And what are you thinking when it comes to next week?
Well, next week is going to be a different story, Jenny. The beginning of the week is going to start pretty similar to this week, but as early as Tuesday, we're going to start seeing some tightness in capacity. Similar to what we called out through the Thanksgiving holiday, the volatility is going to come from capacity displacement as drivers shift to go closer to where they're based out of, to be with their families and take time off possibly, and as shippers change their behavior of tendering because they are closed for longer periods of time around the holidays. Now, this causes disruptions in their routing guide, which plays out into the broader volatility of capacity.
Now, Mays, one thing to note that I think is important here is we had a side conversation on what tender volumes look like over the last couple of years or the last 4 years. Give us some insight on how that's changed.
Traditionally speaking, volume in the market slows down after the Thanksgiving holiday through the beginning of December. That's why we usually anticipate lower rates in the first half of December. This year, we still got lower rates in the first half of December, but volume levels at a national level continues to be stronger than volume prior to this past Thanksgiving. And again, that is not something we traditionally have seen in the last 4 years. Now, obviously, this year, it has played out differently, and there's a lot of things that we need to start digging into to understand that. And one thing is inventory levels. Is it because inventory levels have right-sized and shippers had to push a little more expedited freight into the market? Because we have seen, when looking at the trends by length of haul, that there was more longer haul freight in the market post the Thanksgiving holiday than we have seen in the last couple of years relative to where volume and that length of haul was prior to Thanksgiving.
And next year we will have a lot to get into when it comes to what Lunar New Year looks like, and especially what rates forecasted for Q1 will look like as well. But you know what it's time for? Our last regional breakdown of the year, Maze. What are some of the hottest markets that we're looking at?
As I called out earlier, the West Coast and Northeast continue to be the hotter markets for carriers, where they are seeing some pressure on rates.
Well, then why don't we get started with the West Coast? What's going on over there?
We are seeing rates on the longest length of hauls increase the most, and that is driving up the average cost for freight originating on the West Coast. If you're staying within the West Coast, you likely saw declines in the past week. But as I called out, the volume on the longer lengths of haul have continued to stay pretty high relative to where they were prior to the Thanksgiving holiday, and that's what is likely leading to rates leaving the West Coast seeing an increase from last Monday to today.
And we might as well drive across the country and talk about our other hot region, the Northeast.
The Northeast saw a very modest increase, but it was really driven by upstate New York due to what we continue to tell people to watch out for, and that's the weather. Other than that, the actual volume driving markets in the Northeast saw a slim decline. So although we are saying that the Northeast saw an increase, it wasn't where carriers primarily drive towards to get freight. So it's still an area to keep an eye on, because winter weather is definitely going to play a role over the next 2 weeks if some events come up.
Weather can certainly be unpredictable in the Northeast, but why don't we talk about the Midwest?
The Midwest is a mixed bag of tightening and loosening markets. But similar to the Northeast, the largest volume driving markets all experienced decreases, from Chicago to Joliet to Columbus, Indianapolis, St. Louis, you name it. Most likely, if there's a lot of volume that originates out of that market, it's all a decrease. The more remote markets up in the Dakotas and even parts of Wisconsin and Montana saw increases. But again, there's not a whole lot of drivers up there. Now, it's important to call it, Jenny, we're likely to see this very slim decrease continue through this week before seeing a larger increase in the Midwest and Northeast through the holiday season, as the weather continues to be cold and the winter weather definitely continues to be a variable, and how volatile the markets get through the end of December.
So let's shift gears away from the cold weather and talk about the coastal and southeast regions. What's going on there?
Because these are the two regions that I called out that if I was a betting man on, I would say that these would see the largest decrease week over week. And Jenny, they did. Every market except for two in the southeast saw a decrease from last week. Now, Atlanta, being one of the largest markets by volume in the US, saw a pretty substantial decrease, Jenny, just under 3%. Now, Atlanta overall has been seeing its market share slowly decrease over the last couple months, and that's something that we're going to get into in the new year, as a lot of shippers have shifted their imports back to the West Coast in the last couple months, and that's going to have an impact on some of these markets that saw larger increases through the pandemic as imports started to grow along ports such as Jacksonville, Savannah, Norfolk, and others of that like.
And obviously, as we get closer to produce season, that may change. But why don't we focus on the coastal region now?
The coastal region as well saw a decrease in every market except for two. But again, the markets that drive volume saw greater decreases.
And shall we end it now in the South? What's happening over there?
The South did not see the decreases that the Southeast and coastal regions did, but overall, the average outbound rate from the South region saw a decrease. But there are pockets that continue to see tightening, and that's going to be in more rural areas of Texas and even parts of Arkansas and Louisiana.
All right, Maze. Well, I think it's worth noting what is happening with fuel, because as we have recorded over the last maybe 3 or 4 weeks, rates have gone down when it comes to diesel, right?
That's right, Jenny. Carriers and shippers alike both have gotten somewhat of a present with continued lower fuel costs. And just this week, we were seeing fuel back below $4 a gallon at a national average that we haven't seen since the week of July 24th. But Jenny, for carriers, as you know, this is huge because they've had a difficult year. Fuel's skyrocketed up, come back down. It's been pretty volatile. And the freight market itself has remained oversupplied. So any savings that carriers and drivers can get, I'm sure they are more than happy to take advantage of. So they're ending the year with lower fuel prices than they've seen in the last couple months.
And that is surely a holiday gift that anyone can appreciate in trucking. Now, Maze, I can't believe it. Like we said at the top of the show, it's our last episode of the year. What do you think about that?
That's right, Jenny. This is our last episode of 2023. And I look forward to how we continue to evolve this going into 2024. And I want to take a moment to thank you for all your help this year.
Well, I have to thank you. I've learned quite a lot this year, and I'm really thankful for our partnership. Maze, why don't you give people a little sneak peek into what they can expect for the first episode of 2024?
That's right, Jenny. When we come back in 2024, we're going to take a deeper dive into what happened in the freight market over the holidays with rates and volatility. But more importantly, we're going to take a slight turn and talk about imports and volume expectations through Q1, because these are going to be indicators on what starts forming that crystal ball opinion on how carriers should react to the current market conditions that they find themselves in. Now, it's no surprise, everyone knows that January and February are usually the lowest volume months throughout the year, and where the freight market is the softest. So it's going to be super important for carriers to continue to navigate the market as it stays pretty depressed through the first half at the minimum of Q1. But let's start talking about where we see rates going throughout the entire Q1 as soon as we turn into 2024. Again, Jenny, I hope you have a great holiday and everyone out there has a great holiday, and we look forward to seeing everyone back in 2024.
That's right. So you can look forward to all of that and a few more surprises for you starting January 3rd. We will see you next year with an all-new episode of the Transfix Take. Maze, our listeners, and everyone out there, happy holidays, happy new year, and as always, drive safely. All views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of Transfix Inc. or any parent companies or affiliates or the companies with which the participants are affiliated and may have been previously disseminated by them. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are based upon information considered reliable, but neither Transfix Inc. nor its affiliates nor the companies with which the participants are affiliated warrant its completeness or accuracy, and it should not be relied upon as such. All views and opinions are subject to change.